Hey everyone, welcome back. Today, we're diving into an explainer covering a really, and I mean highly unusual, but just deeply fascinating text. It's an excerpt from a larger work called The Physics of Unity. And what makes this source material so compelling is honestly its sheer ambition. It attempts to build a bridge between the rigid, super-mathematical world of classical electrodynamics and, well, profound theological concepts. It's a text that really pushes the boundaries of how we conventionally think about the universe, literally taking us from the microscopic behavior of electrons all the way up to these towering metaphysical heights.
Which brings us to a rather massive question. What actually happens when hard theoretical physics crashes head-on into divine revelation? You see, the author of our source text attempts to build a rigorous, heavily mathematical bridge connecting classical electrodynamics, quantum mechanics, and theology. They aren't just philosophizing in the abstract here. They are actively trying to map the spiritual onto the physical using equations. It's an incredible structural attempt to prove that the mechanics of the universe itself are driven by a higher purpose.
Okay, let's run through the roadmap real quick so you know where we're headed. First, we'll look at the physics of unity. Second, the three levels of dynamics. Third, deriving the Dirac equation. And finally, what the author calls a flight to God. Basically, we're building from foundational physics right up to a massive metaphysical conclusion.
Let's start with Section 1, the physics of unity. All right, before we get completely lost in the complex math or the theology of it all, we need to establish the fundamental premise of the author's work. The text defines this physics of unity as a framework where the dynamics of an electron are actually formed by the response of the universe to the field radiated by that very electron. Essentially, the electron acts, and the universe literally pushes back. The author calculates this response using what they call a two-worlds classical electrodynamics model, and through this calculation they demonstrate that they can derive Newton's equation, complete with the correct value for mass. So the core takeaway here is this idea of a massive cosmic feedback loop that's actively shaping particle motion.
Moving on to Section 2, three levels of dynamics.
So, knowing that the universe pushes back, let's walk up the author's conceptual staircase. They lay out three evolutionary steps bridging classical particle movement to quantum mechanics. Step 1 is the universe's response. That pushback we just talked about? It causes the electron to enter a stable trajectory, specifically rotating around a circle. Then Step 2 introduces a collective mode. By factoring in transitions between different worlds, the model generates many copies of the same electron, and they are all moving on that exact same circular path. Finally, Step 3 looks at copies of circles. This is where the electrons transition to other worlds and generate completely new circles, which the author argues is what ultimately gives us the mechanics of the quantum world. To really wrap your head around this, think of it like a giant cosmic hall of mirrors. The text explains that transitions between these worlds generate a vast collective state of circles. Just imagine a single electron reflecting, transitioning to other dimensions or worlds, and generating new circles at a massive scale, eventually zooming all the way out to approach the limiting scale of the universe itself. According to the author, this vast collective state of mirrored circles is the exact thing that forms our directly observable quantum mechanics.
Which brings us to Section 3, deriving the Dirac equation.
Now here's where the text moves into some pretty heavy mathematics. At this third level of dynamics, the author attempts to derive the famous Dirac equation, which, if you're familiar, typically describes the behavior of fermions, like electrons. Notice how the math is set up here. They simplify the mathematical Lagrangian, the core equation describing the system's dynamics, by making it dependent on three very specific parameters of that circle we just mentioned: the coordinate of the center, the velocity of the center, and the direction of the axis. By focusing solely on these parameters, the author builds a symbolic equation to describe the electron's state across multiple worlds without even needing to initially rely on an external electromagnetic field.
And honestly, this is a brilliant illustration of how different this paradigm really is. In modern, everyday physics, objects known as spinors are often viewed as these strange, sort of weird two-valued mathematical objects. But in the physics of unity, the author argues that spinors are completely natural. They present the idea that our space is actually a unity of four separate spaces kind of sticking together. And because the dynamics of a ground state involve moving through all of these interconnected spaces, that strange two-valueness suddenly makes perfect logical sense within this framework.
So, tying that all together, at this third level of dynamics, the Dirac equation doesn't just pop out of nowhere. It emerges as a direct result of the universe's response. The author summarizes that Dirac bispinors naturally occur in equilibrium with an external chaotic electromagnetic field. It's a really fascinating mathematical argument. Standard quantum equations aren't just abstract, disconnected rules. They arise purely from classical electrodynamics and the universe's statistical pushback on the electron.
And finally, Section 4, A Flight to God. Okay, we're zooming way out now to the metaphysical capstone of this whole logical pyramid. The text literally states, "The above derivation is a result of some revelations. The evident success of this action I see as a proof of the divine nature of those revelations." The author is explicitly framing their mathematical success, specifically that derivation of the Dirac equation, as literal spiritual proof. They're making a completely objective claim within the text that their equations serve as validation of divine inspiration, which they then use to justify the next theoretical steps.
Building right off of that momentum, the author introduces this idea of an algorithm of ascent. They propose that the universe's response, that cosmic pushback we established earlier, can actually be counterbalanced by applying this algorithm of ascent and factoring in the kinetics of high frequencies. They argue we'd hit a cutoff at high energies, which would unlock a completely new physics. It's presented as a literal, theoretical roadmap to transcend our current physical limitations.
So the whole thesis really comes to a head in this final quote from the text. It says, "After some steps of this kind, we shall find ourselves near the throne of God. That is the actual aim of the physics of unity." The author's ultimate argument here is that theoretical physics has a cosmic spiritual purpose. For them, the equations aren't just describing matter or predicting where a particle is going to go. They are literal steps on a ladder ascending toward the divine.
So, it leaves us with a massive provocative question. If the equations of the universe actually are a flight to the divine, what is the next level of physics going to reveal? It is an incredibly bold, highly unusual bridge between classical electrodynamics and pure mysticism. And regardless of whether you view this source text as just a mathematical curiosity or a profound philosophical proposition, it for sure forces us to look at the underlying mechanics of our reality and how the universe responds to us in a completely new light. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the nature of our universe.